Good little critter. You want some more carrots? That's a good boy. Like Bob Ross, I love woodland creatures. And while I might not have any squirrels or little deer, I do have some paints in my imagination. So let's get started. Today, I'll be painting 3 types of Bob Ross style skies. I'll start with a simple one, a nice blue sky with some puffy clouds. When you mix up the blue for your sky, it's important to use a lot of white paint and just a little bit of blue paint so that you really get a light daytime look to your sky. If your blue is too dark, it's gonna make your sky look like it's twilight, like it's getting dark outside. Mix your paint with a medium brush and then switch to a large brush. Get some of that paint on the end of the bristles. Dip the brush in water and spread a thin layer over the entire page. You do not have to bring the blue sky all the way down to the very bottom of the page. Just cover about 90 or 80% of it. If you wanted to be a little bit fancy, you could add a little bit of darker blue to the very top of the sky. The top of the sky, the part that is right above your head, is going to be slightly darker and deeper, and you'll notice that next time you look up on a clear day. So I'm just going to darken the very top of the sky and fade it down in by adding a little bit of watery blue paint right on top of that sky layer and just fading it in. Don't overdo this touch. Just a little bit of darker blue faded down will give your sky a little bit of depth and a more realistic look. Then wash your brush, dry the devil out of it, and we're ready for a nice puffy cloud. A little bit of white paint on the end of the brush, and then begin making nice puffy, fluffy shapes, curlicues, loop-de-loops, allowing these to fade and blend in with the base sky color. Don't let these brush strokes pop out and be really thick. Allow them to just fade into the blue of the sky. Have fun with the shape of your cloud. It could be a big, giant, fluffy cloud. You could have a bunch of little ones hanging out. Whatever feels right for you. Just make sure that they look light and fluffy and are nice and thin. I like to allow the top of the clouds to be a little crisper where you can really see the shape of them, and then at the bottom of the clouds kind of fade that in to the blue. Let's add a few more clouds. In general, the bigger clouds will be towards the top of the page, and as they come down, they'll get a little bit smaller because they'll be further in the distance. If your clouds end up looking too thick, one trick is to take the rag and just kind of swirl and dab to fluff and thin that cloud. It's a great trick. I think the sky needs one more little cloud over in the left. And I'm going to drag out the side of that other cloud. And voila, a beautiful daytime sky. And if you stare at the sky for long enough, eventually a sunset will appear. And that will be our next painting, a nice sunset sky. Bob Ross usually starts his sunsets from the middle and works out. But in this case, I'm going to try starting from the outside and working in. And I'm hoping that will help the purples and reds not to take over the yellows in the middle of the sunset. So I'm actually going to start with a nice purple color, making sure that I'm adding some white to it to keep it nice and light. And then using a big brush and some water to spread that around the edges of the page. The center of the sunset should be towards the top middle of the page. Don't put it right in the middle of the page, or otherwise your mountains and other landscape features might cover it up. So I'm going to allow that purple to just be kind of danced around the edges. Don't bring it all the way into the middle because we need that for the pure yellow for the sun. Anytime you get a puddle of paint on your page, go ahead and grab your rag and dry that puddle out. You want to use water to help you spread, but you shouldn't have big puddles sitting on your paper. Now I'm going to begin mixing up a series of colors and working them inward into the sunset. I'm going to mix up a pink and blend that into the purple, using a little bit of water and a lot of brushing back and forth to get a nice faded look. Now I'm going to make that red a little bit more orange by adding yellow to it, and then blending and fading that in. We're basically trying to create a rainbow here, where the purple fades to the reddish pink, fades to the red orange, fades to the orange and the yellow orange, and eventually to yellow into the center. I'm always working the new color outward into the previous layer, not necessarily working it inward. The circle will gradually get smaller and smaller, but the real challenge is to work the new color into the color that's behind it. And the last color that I'll add is pure yellow with just a little bit of water to thin it out. And I'll fade it outward into the other colors, and then bring it inward to finish that sunset. Beautiful colors, beautiful fade. I think we're ready for the sun. And for the sun, we get to finger paint. Dip your finger into the white paint, just a little bit, don't overdo it, and make a nice little circle, pressing the paint into the paper, keeping it nice and neat. Don't go too small or too large here, about the size of a dime, maybe a quarter. Now here, Bob Ross would usually use a palette knife or a brush to fade or smear the sun into the canvas. But since we're working on paper, we have to have a little bit of a lighter touch. So I'm actually just gonna take the edge of my finger and go around the edge of the sun a couple times and allow that white to just fade into the yellow for a really nice sunset look. The only thing this sunset needs now is some nice colorful clouds. So I'm gonna mix up a peachy color by using yellow, red, and white. And then I'm gonna scatter some nice clouds around the sun. I'll add one up into the top right, another one a little lower on the left, and one really nice trick to make your sunset look realistic is to put one of the clouds right across the sun itself, just overlapping with that edge of the sun. To make these clouds a little more puffy, we could add a layer of white paint on top of them, making nice loop-de-loop puffy shapes. Be careful that the clouds don't get too thick though. Still keep them nice and thin by adding just a little bit of paint and using your brush to get the texture, not big globs of paint. Now oftentimes in a sunset, you will see really light, colorful clouds, but you also see darker colors, dark purples where the clouds have been silhouetted by the sun. So I'm gonna mix up, not a dark purple, but a little bit darker than the other colors of the sunset, basically just a medium purple. And I'm gonna fade that into the bottoms of the clouds to give some colorful shadows and some depth and size to these clouds. I'm gonna fade those darker areas into the cloud and then also go back and add some lighter areas, some fluffy spots to balance it back out. Continuing to just kind of work that cloud, adding in a little bit of reds, just having fun with the colors, all the while using that fluffy loop-de-loop texture. And in the end, I've got a beautiful, dramatic sunset. Awesome. And again, if we were to stay outside and keep looking at the sky, eventually it would turn dark. It would turn to nighttime, and the moon would come out. Let's see what that would look like. When you paint a night sky, never use straight up black paint. Always use a dark color. In this case, I'm gonna use a greenish color by starting with some blues and a little bit of yellow, kind of make a blue-green, and then adding in a healthy dose of black. You can use a little bit more black paint here than you would normally because we're gonna paint it into a thin layer. So even if it seems like that black is taking over, once you spread it thin on the page, you should still be able to see that green come through as well. Then use a big brush and a dip of water and begin spreading that dark paint across the entire paper. When you're painting a nighttime scene, you have to cover the entire paper in that base layer. Don't leave any white paper showing at the bottom. Once you've got a nice, thin but dark layer across the entire paper, you're ready to get fancy. We're gonna add the light of the moon. So I'm gonna mix up, not using pure white, but using some yellow and a little bit of that base sky color, that kind of dark greenish, to make this kind of grayish yellow glow color. Then I'm going to use the big brush, load it up with some of that paint, this time not using any water, and I'm gonna figure out where I want that moon to be. Place it somewhere towards the top-ish part of the page, don't put it right in the middle, but as far as side to side goes, you could put it on either side or in the middle. I'm gonna put mine on the left side and fade it in, some kind of cross-hatching, diagonal brush strokes, fading that glow into the dark, allowing it to fade completely into the dark sky around the edges. And now we have a nice faded glow, and we can layer the moon right on top of that. I'm going to mix up a little more paint for the moon, using the same color as the glow, but adding a little bit more white and a little more blue to it, just to give it a slightly different color than the sky itself. And then painting the moon is just like painting the sun. Get a dollop of it on your finger and make little circles to get a really nice circular moon shape. And the only thing that's different about the moon is you do not need to blend or fade in the edges. Leave those edges nice and crisp. And all this nighttime sky needs now is a few clouds floating above the moon. I'm going to use the exact same color as the moon and paint them in a wispy, kind of zigzaggy shape. I don't like nighttime clouds to be as puffy and as friendly as daytime clouds, so I'm going to paint them in a wispy, diagonal shape. I'll scatter a few of those clouds around the moon. And then I'm going to use a big dry brush to fade the edges of those clouds into the sky. The further away the cloud is from the moon, the more I'm going to fade and work it into the dark sky. That way, the clouds that are closer to the moon are brighter, and it really gives off a nice sense of glow coming from the moon. And with that final touch, this nighttime sky is complete, and now it's your turn. So grab your brushes, and let's get going.